What would you do if Jeff Bezos gave you $1 billion?
In today's episode of Speculative Tolkienism, we list the top problems in the Rings of Power and speculate about what the show could have done differently, or what we would have done if we were running things. Big problem 1. Adar wasn't Celeborn. He should have been.
This could have been cool. They didn't do it right, but this scene, for a moment, I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to impress me right at the end after a whole season of crap and disappointment and hilarity. I thought this was going to be like, oh, because, okay, check it out. So this whole time we called Halbrand was Sauron. We called the stranger was Gandalf. Like, they haven't been able to fool us, and I don't maybe they didn't even ever want to fool us, right? But when go
Okay,
ahead.
yeah, maybe they didn't want to fool us, but I mean, come on, they were doing everything to.
If they were trying to fool us, it was like super pathetic because no
Yeah.
one, not just us, but no one in our sphere of commentators on Rings of Power, everyone got it from the beginning. Everyone's like, oh, that's Sauron. Oh, that's Gandalf. We all knew, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, but then they pulled this, and he like had the ring for a minute, and he started looking rather handsome, right?
Yeah.
And for a second, I thought, oh shit, they pulled the wool over our eyes. This is Celeborn. I thought for a second, oh no, they're going to make this Celeborn, and I would have had to hand it to them because we've been asking this whole time, where the hell's Celeborn? And for a second, I'm like, oh damn, that's Celeborn, and like I got a chill down my spine. I'm like, they actually fooled us, and then they didn't because he died and it wasn't Celeborn.
Yeah. That again.
That would have been actually pretty cool,
right? And I mean, let's speak of Celeborn too. Like, I would have had Galadriel trying to find her a companion. I would have looked at that and not pretended like Celeborn didn't exist. You know, it would have given Galadriel something to do.
Right.
I don't know. It just.
But in canon, she's already married to Celeborn at this point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so where's Celeborn? But for a minute, I was like, oh shoot, are they going to try to graft the Adar story? He suddenly becomes a handsome elf, and now he's Celeborn.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that would actually have been kind of cool, but they didn't do that. So
Nope.
I thought I was going to have to give them admit that they scored a point, but they still are batting 0.
They didn't.
It's so sad.
Big problem. The hobbits were too dorky. Make them wild and scary.
This is what I would do. Speaking of the hobbits.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this. I would have made them less jolly, more tribal, more feral. But like, because I think that it would have been an interesting look at where they started and where they ended up. Where you've got like almost like wildlings or whatever, you know, where they're hunter gatherers, and then they end up like Bilbo and the you know, and Sancho Proudfoot. They're these fat, comfortable beings that like, you know, just no hardship. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, does that make sense?
It would be very fascinating because we do associate hobbits with comfort. It would be fascinating to see like a wild, almost scary hobbit, kind of like I don't know what's something in the animal kingdom that's like just kind of
like a meerkat or something like that.
Like a meerkat, yeah, like a freaking Tasmanian devil. Like just feral, and you don't want to piss it off, and it just goes crazy.
Because what this would have in effect have done is Gandalf, as it always says, like, there's more to hobbits than meet the eye. Like, you know, like if they get cornered, you don't want to like be on their bad side, whatever. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here.
Yeah,
but it's like why? But you can show why. Like they were these dangerous wandering creatures that basically got domesticated. You know, like
that would have been a really cool backstory. I didn't even thought of that, but like, you know that deep down the hobbits do have this propensity to. They can be very, very brave. They can be like in a pinch. They can kind of like surprise you with their bravery.
And also, I mean, just to to further detail it, you can see how they have to be quiet and learn how to walk silently to hunt.
Right.
Because they can walk silently. You know what I'm talking about? It's like you could give them like you could give the origin of the hobbits by showing them as like all of these survival skills that they had to develop over time that they still carried with them to, the third age.
It goes completely against what they did do, where they made these hobbits dorky, I don't know, like bumbling.
They would never they would never like their lifestyle. They would never survive.
Easy,
you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, easy prey.
Yeah.
They would be easy pickings for any predator. Like, they didn't seem to know where they were going. They were slow. Like, you never saw them be particularly fast or particularly sleuthful
Yeah.
when they went in their caravans. They just looked like this lumbering, slow, obvious, marching, like, protein source for anything that wants to eat them.
Yeah.
And what are they going to do? So it's like, why did this group survive? And they're like, yeah, they're just blah. That would have been really fascinating to show a dangerous hobbit and a sensitive orc.
The idea of a sensitive orc could have been done much better.
And they did kind of try to do the sensitive orc, but but you're right. The Adar was actually a decent innovation that could have been considered canonical because he is like a half elf. But you ask, like, okay, if now in the third age the orcs get really rambunctious and they're just immoral, amoral species. But maybe you could consider that in the first age or the second age, when orcs were first made, maybe they retained a little bit of that elven spirit, like they hadn't quite killed it yet. So you had like an Adar who was like almost still elfin in some ways. That actually
honestly,
would have been cool.
I probably would have, like, if I were writing, I probably would have done, there would be a power struggle between Adar and another Uruk, for lack of a better term. I'm just trying to like see what I would have done differently. And I would have, because like, I think the first orcs were fascinating, and you could have shown these morally ambiguous orcs.
Tolkien was always about, these different tribes of the elves, and there was the Leia-Quindi and the Morquindi, and like the different elven groups, and depending on how quickly they went into the west and got to the light, they were like, those are the light elves, and then the darker elves, and then the ones that never saw the light. So there were different like levels, just like stratifications of elves, just like there were different stratifications of men. And it would have been interesting to have like basically a light orc and a dark orc. I mean, or a high orc and a low orc. And the high orcs could be like, dude, I'm barely orc. I'm mostly an elf.
Yeah.
Like Melkor, all he did to me was like poke me in the eye, but I'm still an elf. But he's just starting to work on me. But I'm still mostly elf. And you could have a group of like mostly elves kind of have a power struggle with the not so much elves, and they would have been like, okay. And you could have had all these like moral ambiguities and all these very interesting kind of tribal battles, but I don't know. That would have been really cool.
And honestly, you know what I would have tried to do? Again, I don't have any of the details. I would have made, so we've got, okay, all right, so we've got this faction of orcs, right? Okay, so that would be like the main, like one of the main stories. I would probably have taken the Halbrand character and made him the good guy, like completely the good guy, right? And not telegraphed anything. I would have like, we are telling the story. We like basically Halbrand would be our avatar, and like I don't know, like have some kind of MacGuffin where you think Sauron is behind the whole orc thing, like the whole evil orc thing.
I mean, you could have thought Adar was Sauron this whole time, but it's this other guy that you thought was this princely, wonderful person, named Halbrand. But yeah, they telegraphed that way too early, and they revealed him as Sauron way too early. It was so obvious.
Big problem. Major vagueness when it came to the power in these so-called rings of power.
These rings are supposed to be the rings of power, but I think one of the key and major colossal failures of this show, and why it failed so much, is because it was never clear what was their power, was there a limit to that power? And 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 why did some people who weren't wearing rings also exhibit some kind of mysterious power? And the first one I could think of is good old Sauron here, Halbrand, who he is able to control people, right?
Right.
This is one of the messed up things about this show, and I just couldn't get my head around it. Here's Sauron, who's this master manipulator, who's able to, with a flick of the wrist, right, make Myrdania fall off this cliff. Or no, what he's doing with the flick of the wrist is he's commanding and controlling Celebrimbor to lash out and push
Throw her off. Yeah,
Myrdania
throw her
off
off
the
the damn
cliff.
thing.
Now
Yeah.
that shows quite a bit of power, right? The power to manipulate people, to control people and their actions, right?
Right.
He's not wearing a ring. He's like the whole time we're watching him beg Celebrimbor to make him more rings, give him more rings, give him rings for elves and men and dwarves. He wants rings to give him power. If he can do this, why need rings? Because he's already powerful. He can already control people. And why not just compel Celebrimbor to do his bidding just with a flick of the wrist? He doesn't need a
Yeah.
ring. He just flicks his wrist, and Celebrimbor will respond to his will by flicking his wrist. He has that power. He has that power to control not just Celebrimbor, but other people in other scenes. And if he has that power, then what does he need rings for?
Right. Right.
I mean, it's like, I mean, and the whole thing's like, I need rings. I'm desperate to get rings. And I'm like, dude, first of all, why don't you just go create your one ring and control them that way? But you already seem to be a master manipulator controlling people already. Like, if he can control, I'm sorry, but if he can control, like, Celebrimbor enough to make Celebrimbor think he's living in a peaceful environment so he can focus on making rings, why can't Sauron go or Anatar go the extra step and have and control Celebrimbor enough to have Celebrimbor hand those rings over?
That's a
I
good
mean,
question.
yeah. I mean, it's like so. So my point is that we don't know the limits of his power, and they seem very arbitrary.
Well,
If he controls him enough to be able to get him to do all this stuff, then why can't he just tell him to give him the rings? But why does he even need the rings? He's already controlling him.
right. You know what though? This is bad writing. Like, okay, along this topic, what I would have done had I been the king of the forest on this thing, it's like I would have established rules for everything. Right. Like this.
That's what I need. I need rules,
Yes.
limits.
Right. This is what Sauron can do right now. This is what these can do right now. This is what this can do right now, and not go beyond that. And that would in that would make Sauron like I can't get beyond this. Whatever his limitations are, I can't
Right.
get beyond my limitations. I need something more. So that it would give him a reason to forge the One Ring. Now, the other thing I would have done, speaking of rings, is I would not have made them evil right off the bat, knowing that they're evil.
Yeah,
But
what's the point of
they,
making him evil?
yeah, I mean, I would like. Well, one, the Elvish rings were never evil, so that's I mean, again, like that's they should not never have made those to begin with. Like they should be. It should have. To me, they should have done the nine, the seven, or the seven and the nine, whatever, doesn't matter, and distribute them. They should have been distributed this season. Like where each dwarven leader had a ring. They gave the rings out, the nine to the mortal men. Everything's kumbaya and stuff like that. And then the last thing that I would show of this series of the season is wait a minute, something really jacked up is happening with the men's rings. Like what I'm talking about with the nine, and
Right.
all of a sudden you've got it makes it to where oh, these rings aren't. I mean, everyone knows what they are, and I mean everyone knows what the rings are, but you could have disguised it a little bit better, or at least shown them to
Well,
be like beneficial.
yeah, I mean, it didn't serve anything plot wise to make, for instance, Elrond he immediately was hostile about wearing the elven rings.
Right,
And
right.
like, why? I mean, there was no evidence for why they would be evil or reason to suspect them for being evil, and there was no, like, nothing happened, no event that would have made Elrond suspicious. That
Yeah, yeah.
so his overreaction was like we the audience were like, well, what's the problem? Same thing with Durin, the son Durin. He's like, take off the ring, father. And I'm
Yeah.
like, there's no reason to be so over the top in your anti-ring uh, fervor at this early stage. I think it would have been much better had they done it what you said, where it was like everything's cool and these rings are really giving us a lot of benefits.
Yeah.
And then in the back of your mind, there's that whisper of like, oh, maybe, but by the end of the season, it would have been like, but it's all on a shaky foundation.
Like Celebrimbor comes and it's like, I made these elven rings, like these 3 rings, after all this bullshit is happening with the 9 and the 7, right?
Hmm.
And then it would make sense where he'd be apprehensive. It's like, well, I don't know about the rings, even though Sauron has never touched them. There still might be some kind of residual power, blah, 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 whatever,
Yeah.
right?
There needs to be rules. So, Sauron can't just willy-nilly manipulate people unless he gets the rings that he needs to manipulate people
Yeah,
for. So that gives him, I mean, so he's not all powerful. He can't just like make people stab each other, which he does, or throw people off buildings, which he does. Like, if he could do all those things, then what the hell does he need rings for? So
Yeah,
you got to limit. Yeah, it's just. I mean, it's like at some point someone was like, "Oh, we need to get Anatar to get out of this bind." Oh, I know. He can just like make someone stab someone else. I'm like, well, now you've just given him a new set of powers. That he,
yeah.
so you just
Well, it's like,
any momentum or any sense of tension.
The Balrog was always lurking around. What real threat did he pose?
It was vague, like exactly what it was that caused the Balrog to awaken, because we've known about the Balrog being down there for like 2 years now, and I'm like, if he's awake and he hears all the hammering, I mean, why? What's his
yeah,
holdup?
what's what's stopping
What's
him
he
from
been
like
doing?
just
What's he been doing
that's
down
what
there?
yeah, it's like, there's obviously like, I mean, maybe he's like, not too big to get through, but too big to get through the hallways. But I got to imagine that they could
No,
probably figure something out.
but I mean,
Yeah.
if he's such a light sleeper that he would be awakened by a leaf, don't you think like constant hammering of mining dwarves through the ages and millennia would have woken him up a long time ago? I mean,
Right.
I just don't understand. Like, and now that he is awake and he's been awake, what's stopping him from wreaking havoc? And if he's already come up and brought Durin down, like, is he satisfied with that? What's he going to do now? I mean, they have this Balrog on the loose. You'd assume that they'd need to keep their army in Khazad-dûm for that, but suddenly they give the army to Eregion to defend Eregion too late, I might add.
Yeah, and it was like decent. And whenever the dwarven kingdom needs something, basically it's like, let's get Disa to sing and then make her do, like,
Yeah,
we need to collapse the tunnel. So hey, let's just have her sing. Hey, we need to summon some bats. Okay, well, let's put her in
right.
in this tunnel and have her sing.
Disa should just be able to sing and make the Balrog explode.
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
didn't you try that?
yeah. Like, just sing. Maybe they sing, the Balrog will fall in love with her, and then there's going to be this whole Doran Balrog kind of love triangle, Disa,
That would
right?
have actually been more interesting than what we got.
And the reason the Balrog is so angry is that Doran ended up, like, Disa ended up going back with Doran, and then he's like, well, I got to get my rival. I mean,
Right.
I just came up with like a great plot point, and
A love triangle. I mean, they're always shipping these characters, so why not ship the Balrog?